NAB 2023 is behind us, and now that everyone's fully recovered from the fun, excitement, and lack of sleep, I can tell you all about our experience with the camera-to-cloud workflow that we were using for our coverage and the FUJIFILM X-H2S system. You can check out our coverage here on the ProVideo Coalition YouTube channel, and be sure to subscribe for more of that kind of stuff. But while that playlist essentially covers our coverage, there's been individual posts of each video here on PVC, and I wanted to run the gear down and the workflow side of things because I think it'll be beneficial to those of you who might try to do your own event coverage or at least find this kind of nerdy stuff interesting. So first off, if you know anything about me, you know I'm a big fan of both the entire line of the Fujifilm cameras as well as the emerging tech behind camera to cloud. Cameraman Adam Green and I have yelled from the rooftops about how useful C2C can be since we first deployed it at Cinegear in 2022. And our excitement hasn't changed as new additions to the workflow seem to be added every month. That being said, we did learn a few things on this trip as NAB 2023 was a particularly challenging environment. While the content is fantastic, and I've gotten great response from our coverage, the execution was a little rocky at times, and I'll explain why. Hopefully this article will help you pull off something like this if you were planning on it, you know, event coverage. But even if you're not, I bet something in here will ring true and be beneficial. So with that being said, we will start with the good stuff, the not rocky stuff. So first off, the results. You know, before we get into anything, I have to say the end product is exactly as we set out to create. Every interview we did was fantastic. The people we met and the products we demoed were super cool. Cameraman Adam and editor Alex Jones absolutely knocked it out of the park. And I personally think we made a wonderful supplement to any existing coverage out there that I was told a number of times from the folks we were talking to felt a little stale. I think we were able to have a more real, honest discussion with our subjects that didn't feel as newsy as some other outlets kind of make, and that enables you, the viewer, to get a more nuanced look at any given product or service. My goal was not to be combative, obviously, letting the companies pitch their stuff, but I also wanted to be inquisitive and friendly, hopefully getting past the press release, as it were, and into the questions you and I might have that wouldn't be covered by a simple talking head booth presentation. And so I think we delivered there, you know. I hope I can be kind of gregarious. Second good thing, the camera. One thing I and most folks love about the Fujifilm series of cameras is the film simulations. Not that I know for sure that they accurately emulate any given film stock, but it allows you to basically color grade in camera. This is awesome for photography, and you don't have to look far to see amazing results from people that they're achieving there. But for something like this, it was great to be able to just dial in the look as I wanted it, so editor Alex didn't have to worry about correcting anything and could just focus on assembly and upload, which he did an incredible job, by the way. Go check out how polished those things are, for real. For something like event coverage or news gathering or whatever, you don't need log, and certainly not the 10-bit 422 6.2K the X-H2S is capable of. But if you're planning on going to broadcast with the C2C proxies, something like the amazing new F-Log2 gamma curve won't really be properly served, in my opinion, by the limited 45 megabit per second bitrate. Even though ProRes proxy is 10-bit, in the interest of speed, we use the Eterna film simulation with the shadows and saturation boosted a bit and the highlights brought down just to account for the convention center like top-down lighting, and that was creating any deep shadows or poppy highlights. We also nixed the noise reduction and sharpness, setting those to their absolute lowest values, as I've found you actually get a cleaner image that way, which we sort of knew about sharpness to a degree, but I didn't realize that noise reduction at 0 wasn't 0, it's -4. And the image just comes out a lot sharper if you turn that off. If you need to reduce noise, you can do it in post, but these cameras aren't terrifically noisy to begin with. They have their purposes, obviously, but as a preference, I just turn them off. Worst case, you just denoise and post, like I said, but I haven't found that that's necessary with a properly exposed image, and especially not from these cameras. As you can see in the final videos, the end quality is fine, and actually YouTube did more damage to the videos than the proxies as we were uploading in 1080. You can get away with up-resing your 1080 footage to 4K a lot of times to get around YouTube's poor HD encoding, and it'll make your 1080p footage look better. Not like 4K necessarily, but on YouTube, your 1080p footage will look better. And the little gear will say 4K, but you know, whatever. Moving on. Another nice thing is the X-H2S doesn't have a clip length limit. It's a hard one. Clip length limit. So although it only happened once, any interviews over 30 minutes wouldn't get cut off. So for live event coverage or similar, that's huge, and an offside, a downside of using DSLR or mirrorless cameras for certain gigs. You know, narrative, you're running 2 to 5, maybe 10-minute clips, so who cares? But events, you kind of tend to just run. Fujifilm cites a 240-minute runtime at 4K 60 if your memory card and batteries can handle it, or until it overheats, but it doesn't tend to overheat. The lens we used was an amazing Fujinon MKX 18-55 Cine lens, which is a surprisingly lightweight little beast. And I've talked about it before because it opens to a T2.9, we weren't wanting for more exposure anywhere, you know, shooting around 800 to 1250 ISO, which gave us a nice clean image. The optical quality is near perfect with no breathing, vignetting, or CA or any of that to speak of, which gave us a tack sharp image even wide open, which further helped out our proxy workflow and made it look its best. They also have a really pleasant fall off and a really smooth bokeh out of focus area, although those weren't particularly highlighted in these simple interview scenarios with me up against a booth wall more often than not, you know. But that is something that I learned in a different shoot. Is I had a diffusion filter on it for a camera to cloud event coverage thing, and that introduced a little too much visual noise. Like the bloom didn't translate well after the proxy and the 1080 upload. So a nice sharp lens is what you're looking for here. Obviously, as they are cinema lenses, there's no optical image stabilization, but since the X-H2S has IBIS, cameraman Adam was able to hop off the monopod and go handheld, or even just move with the monopod attached whenever he needed, without having to worry about any shakiness or anything. And it also made the monopod footage rock solid, which was nice. Another thing we really liked was the file transfer grip. The main reason we went with this system was the new file transfer grip available for the X-H2 and X-H2S, whereas before we needed a Teradek, or we could have, if it was out, we could have used an Atomos Connect or something like that to enable C2C functionality. But with the grip, everything is self-contained. So you just put the grip on and it enables both Wi-Fi and Ethernet connection, or Ethernet connection. So you just set your internet source in the camera menu, connect it to your Frame.io project, which is done pretty simply with a QR code in your phone, and you're good to go. Aside from being a transfer device, it also acts like a normal battery grip with all the buttons you're used to, as well as the addition of 2 extra batteries, although those batteries are focused on keeping the grip itself going when you're using camera to cloud. So you do lose out on some of the standard shooting longevity benefits there. But that being said, the battery life on the camera was pretty good. Even though the grip batteries were doing grip tasks, the camera itself actually ran all day on the one internal battery, which we thought was pretty incredible. Obviously, the camera was sipping power from the grip as well, but we actually never had to change the main battery, even though we were leaving the camera on all day and shooting near nonstop from 10 a.m. to about 5 p.m. The camera also didn't overheat. Like I said, even in tests we were doing, left it going as long as we could, never overheated. So that was nice. I think Adam said he left it on for like 8 hours or something. Obviously, one advantage of shooting with a mirrorless camera is the size. Our previous conference coverage was done with my C500 Mark II and a Teradek Cube 655. And while the C500 is not an enormous camera, it certainly can get tiresome after 8 hours of running around. The X-H2S, coupled with the aforementioned very lightweight Cine Zoom, didn't tire either of us out, although obviously Adam was carrying it far more than me. And even if it was, we could just pass it between each other. But the X-H2S is a more standardly mirrorless camera in layout, as opposed to something like the X-T5, which is a more like film classic, I guess you could call it, body, with more dials dedicated to things like ISO and the like on the X-T5. But the X-H2S still has easily legible and universally customizable buttons, allowing you to manipulate any of the settings without having to go menu digging. It's also got a really nice deep grip, which most people seem to prefer. I've got little tiny hands, so the smaller grip on something like my X-T3 or my X100V isn't terrifically difficult to wrangle. One thing I would like to see on this camera is a waveform as opposed to a histogram, which it has, the histogram. And cameraman Adam said he would like to have seen a little more peak on the focus peaking, but you know, minor quibbles, and hopefully those things can be added in one of Fujifilm's constant firmware updates. And in worst case, especially for a narrative type gig, you can just employ an external monitor and that, you know, you're good. Which kind of dovetails into the sticking points. Firstly, and this is on me, I mentioned in my announcement article that scheduling was difficult last NAB. And this year I used this service called Calendly to book everyone. Not sponsored or anything, it's just My sister turned me onto it. And that was a great idea and resulted in a full slate of interviews, which I was very excited about, but I didn't account for any time to address hangups, as we hadn't really run into them before. And for whatever reason, I was feeling particularly confident. So, the numbering on the booths didn't really make any sense. There was a lot of time we were just walking around trying to find places. Sometimes people weren't ready on time, so that would push 3 of those, and now your whole slate's screwed up. And the big one in this case was the Wi-Fi connection in the convention center. So apparently everyone from vendors to speakers was having trouble getting online, not just us, even with our dedicated unit. And that meant the cloud part of the camera to cloud was a bit hindered. We were able to get maybe half or more of our interviews to editor Alex, but the other half we had to edit ourselves when we got back home. And this did highlight a few things to consider when utilizing this system. So in every article or discussion I've had about camera to cloud, I've mentioned how it is a wonderful third backup. And it's also nice to just have a fresh set of eyes in the form of your editor or AE or whoever to let you know if something's up with your footage as soon as you shoot it, who's, doesn't have their head in the mire of the set, as it were. So at Cinegear 2022, for instance, our editor and PVC contributor, Scott Simmons, was able to tell us that we had an audio issue with our first interview, and we were able to run back and go redo it immediately, which saved us the embarrassment of getting home and realizing too late. In the case of NAB 2023, I wasn't considering C2C to be a backup, but our main workflow, which hurt because I'm a big proponent of the 2 is 1, 1 is none philosophy. And I was just very excited to get there and start going and, new and exciting things. And I completely let the 2 is 1, 1 is none philosophy slip. So in a situation where you're not in a wireless Faraday cage like the Las Vegas Convention Center, it's likely not an issue, but for us it was. We ran a bunch of tests where it was flawless, literally flawless. Next year, where I'll absolutely be taking another crack at this whole thing, this is what my plan is. So for scheduling, this was my biggest mistake, like I said, but luckily, simple set of solutions to fix this. I naively assumed 15 minutes between interviews was enough to get to the next one, but that was banking on the idea that we wouldn't need to do any gear maintenance and that every booth would be ready to go when we got there. This was not the case. So we'll go through the gear stuff in a bit, but for everyone's sanity, I just needed to schedule, one interview an hour as opposed to every 30 minutes, which might sound crazy, but this would allow us to account for other interviews going over time that, not ours, but other people doing interviews, subjects not being ready or even there, which happened a couple times, or any unforeseen circumstances like waiting for the end of a loud PA assisted presentation happening right next to the booth we were attempting to talk to. This would also mean that if we did get an interview done on time, we could walk around and find another booth that wasn't on our predetermined list and chat with them and find potentially some hidden gold. A lot of those small booths are actually much more interesting than some of the bigger tentpole booths that are just kind of showing you stuff you already know. Another scheduling snafu, and again, for whatever reason, I thought 15 minutes was plenty of time to do this, was doing back-to-back interviews in different halls. So if you've never been to the Las Vegas Convention Center, there's actually 4 major sections. There's the South, North, Central, and dreaded West Hall. And the bulk of the conference takes place in the North and Central halls, which are basically right next to each other. But it's like a 5 to 10 minute walk to the West Hall from there. And there were a few instances where I had meetings go like North, West, North, Central, West, West, Central, West. And that was a huge time suck, but it did net us about 23,000 steps a day, which is a bonus. Next year, I'm going to schedule 1 interview an hour, like I said, and dedicate each day to a single hall. So not only will we get to our slate of interviews in a timely manner without having to reschedule or cancel, but again, giving us time to wander around, find smaller companies to talk to when we do have spare time. Another slight issue, bigger memory cards. We had plenty of cards, but they were all 325 gigabytes in size, which is kind of weird, which generally wouldn't be an issue and is actually a great idea for footage security. As if one card gets corrupted, you only lose a handful of clips and not your whole day's shoot. If you had just one big card. But when you're using camera to cloud, you need to have the card in the camera to transfer, obviously. So since we were shooting back-to-back interviews, essentially nonstop, the spotty internet wasn't allowing us to get the footage to editor Alex in time before we had to swap cards. So obviously that meant that the transfer of the footage is canceled. The new transfer begins with whatever you're shooting on the new card. Luckily, that didn't result in any problems or anything. You know, it wasn't like half an interview got to Alex, but, you know, not ideal. I also had us shooting in 4K, thinking we would need the footage later for some reason. And that did help us identify certain people by their badges, which may have been illegible in HD. But that obviously filled up the cards faster than necessary. Obviously, the already wonderful looking proxies are going to editor Alex in 1080, but there was no reason to shoot in 4K on a gig like this. I should have just continued to shoot 1080 and we would have had more time on those cards, both literally and for transfers. But the trade-off balance here is just next time I'm going to bring 1 terabyte or maybe even 2 terabytes OWC, some new 2 terabyte cards for cheap. The other thing that was kind of a sticking point was we didn't use the hardware. We actually had 2 cameras in this case, 2 identical ones with the Cine Zoom and everything. And, you know, just in case one went down for some reason, or, you know, we shot some B-roll with the other one while we were doing interviews. But since I was crunched for time, I didn't think to use the other body for transfers. Like, had I given us more time between interviews, we could have stopped and ran over to the Film Tools booth where we were staged and just sort of set and forget a camera to only focus on transfers, or just pick up the other body and leave the first one to keep working. But we were on a train that wasn't stopping. Solution here, obviously, is to simply have me carry around the second body and swap out if a card fills up. Although, alternatively, we could have used a third person, which I think is going to be a big addition next year. Because cameraman Adam and I were running this thing duo, anyway, where he was focused on the camera stuff and I was focused on the interview and the scheduling stuff, which works in theory, but we really did need a third person there to offload tasks onto when we needed, you know, our attention divided. For instance, I was constantly attempting to communicate with PR teams via email and text while also running from booth to booth, and obviously couldn't do so while conducting the interview. So anytime we hit a snag that needed both of our energies, or I simply needed to put my head down and fire off a bunch of correspondence, we could feel the absence of an additional set of hands. This person could have also ran off and got us that second camera while we were recording, or monitored the body's transfer status in a pocket of good Wi-Fi, or, you know, that would have been huge. So again, solution, next convention, I'm just going to see if we can't get an AD/PR person to handle that kind of stuff so Adam and I can focus on the production side of things. But even if we can't, the wider schedule and tighter geographic movement will be hugely beneficial and might remove the intense need for that third person. It'll also be nice to have that person, if we do get one, kind of be the bad guy and keep us on schedule, you know, because I can be kind of excitable and chatty. In terms of backups, like I said, I mostly mean that I was relying on the C2C workflow and didn't have an alternative. You know, have you ever been, this happens to me all the time. If I'll be leaving my house, I'll be like, ooh, I wonder if I should grab, no, it's all right. And then I leave every single time I have that thought, I should have grabbed. I do need that. In this case, it was a CF Express reader. I was about to get on the airplane and I was like, I won't need that. Had I just grabbed the reader, we could have gone to the hotel or even a press room, dumped the footage to the drive, you know, super fast. CF Express transfers so fast, and started uploading it to Frame.io, you know, manually, which again goes pretty quick and solves our problem immediately. Instead, we had one camera connected to the hotel Wi-Fi, which was slow, doing C2C transfers, and then another camera plugged directly into my laptop using the wrong cable. In this case, a USB-C cable, but it was USB 2.0 speed, which, you know, it was intended for charging. USB-C is weird like that. So now I have some marked data cables. And that had to dump to my hard drive before I could upload it to Frame. And that took, I think it was literally like 8 hours or something. It was silly. It was not cool. That very dumb mistake on my part. Next year, it'll be simple enough to just bring my card reader. And like I said, I already bought a handful of guaranteed USB-C 3.2 cables. Because if you don't know, USB-C is a wonderful standard. But cables are never labeled. Like, you never know what a USB-C cable is capable of. It sounds like it's going to fight you. It could be Thunderbolt. It could be USB 2. Like in my case, it could be 3.x. You know, I would love to talk to the USB consortium, because like USB-A, the rectangle one that, you know, you can't do in upside down, the 3.0 or higher cables had that blue bit, so you could visually confirm like, oh, blue means fast, but, you know, USB-C doesn't have that. So actually what I've been doing is, a little aside, I've just been getting colored electrical tape and wrapping it around different cables to know which is which. visually, and that's saved me a lot of heartache since this since NAB. In any case, next year delivery plans in order will be C2C. That doesn't work. Offload on site, offload offsite maybe, and edit at the hotel is the last resort. And that's plenty of alternate solutions in case one of them doesn't pan out. And in this specific instance, we could have had all but maybe the last 5 interviews in editor Alex's hands had I just had my card readers and cables. Probably all of them, honestly, because sometimes the hotel Wi-Fi would go kind of quick. But you live and you learn. That's why we did it. You know, technically, while we were here to deliver a product, it was also, like I said, a bit of a beta test. So wrapping up, overall, you know, foot pain and headaches aside, I think we did what we set out to do. You know, sure, couldn't account for the Las Vegas Convention Center internet situation on the floor, but this experience really reminded me to always assume that Murphy's Law is in full effect and to have multiple backups. You know, if 2 is 1 and 1 is none, technically you need 3 minimum contingency plans. But luckily, I made that mistake, so you don't have to, and I hope that's something you can take away from this video. In terms of camera to cloud and the Fujifilm X-H2S, I will hopefully be employing them again at next year's convention, or even at Cinegear coming up here soon, like next month, I think, with my new best practices in place and things going a lot smoother. While I am a relatively accomplished DP, in my own words, and a very tech literate person, which I can back up. If anything, this experience really just goes to show that no matter how up to date you are on hardware and workflows, you know, whatever you're doing on set that you've researched to hell, the person who will always save your butt is a good AD. So I hope that was all informative. Like I said, I think the content we set out to create is awesome. Please go check all that out. You know, if you have any notes for the types of things you'd like to see in interviews going forward, please let me know. You know, in the comments there, I'll give them a look soon. And that's about it. So that's our coverage of NAB 2023. That's the Fujifilm X-H2S and camera to cloud. Highly recommend looking into camera to cloud if you haven't. Just maybe don't shoot in like an underground bunker. That maybe is a weakness, but pretty much every other time we've used it's great. Anyway, that's it for me. Hope that was informative, helpful, or entertaining. And I will see you next time, or you will see me next time. I can't see you. It's a lens.